History, history. Can you see, little boy, what you mean to me? Can you see how sweet our love has long grown to be? It's time to see the happiness I feel inside of me. Knowing one thing, darling, this love will always be two lovers, history. Ain't that two lovers, history?
Welcome to the History Bhoys Abroad. We've been doing this for almost a year. It's been pretty good. We're on episode 29 today, and in true History Bhoys Abroad fashion, we're stripping it right down, right back to the beginning, 1892. Before we begin, we want to mention that the Celtic Graves Society have an event to celebrate Joe Dodds, a defender from 1908 for over 12 years who played almost 400 games for Celtic. The ceremony will take place at St Conville Cemetery, Glasgow Road, Barrhead, on Saturday the 20th of May at 2 p.m. If you want to find out more information, you can give them a follow on Twitter at Celtic Graves and read up on what they do. It's quite important, and we're massive fans of their work. So, if you've never actually heard our podcast, the History Bhoys Abroad, the idea is pretty simple. We're digging in the crates of Celtic's past to explore lesser known, unknown, or even forgotten elements of the club's history. And we're almost exclusively historical, this podcast. We tend not to really focus on the modern stuff, but we do talk about big games, should they be played. Back to the subject for today. With Celtic winning their 100th trophy this season under Brendan, as well as being in a prime position to win the treble, I thought it'd be quite good to trace everything back, right back to the first major trophy win, which was the Scottish Cup. A slight romantic tinge, I feel, and I am aware that Celtic won trophies prior to this, but the Scottish Cup takes precedence. So, joining me on this podcast are my co-hosts Gilly and Liam. Gilly, how you doing?
I'm tempted to ask how you're doing anyway.
How you doing anyway, Liam? How are you?
I'm not bad, Tony. How's you?
I'm alright, mate. How you doing anyway? Not bad, part 9 in a row. So, through the podcast, obviously, we don't have anything in the way of audio. We don't have anything in the way of interviews. All we have is our trusty Celtic history books. We also have the trusty Celtic wiki website, the Bible. And throughout this, we're just basically going to talk about, the sort of... This is like Celtic have been around for 4 or 5 years. They've just kind of turned professional. They've been in a couple of stadiums. And we're going to talk about some important players as we do that. So we're going to start...
Before we start, can I just check, how did you go about getting your research? Because obviously a lot of the podcasts we've done recently have been like the 80s or 90s, which is quite easy to find videos of and things like that, and even some of the games we'd have been at. How did you go about getting your research for this, Liam? What did you do?
I've got a book called The Celtic Story by James Hadley, which pretty much focuses on Celtic from the birth all the way through until I think it's the 60s it goes up to. I'm trying to see when it was published. It was originally my dad's book that his 1960 it was first published, so it was originally my dad's book that his uncle gave him as a birthday present.
Excellent. Yeah, a lot of the things I'm looking at are books my dad's passed down to me years ago and I've not really looked at, which I've a bit annoyed with myself because they're so interesting. I'm using a book called Celtic, the Official Illustrated History, 1888 to 1995 by a guy called Graham McCall. I put a wee picture on the Twitter of it, so if anybody fancies having a wee look at it, try and get a hold of the book, I'd definitely recommend it. Liam, I'll get a picture of your book as well. You send it to me, we'll get it out on Twitter so people can have a look at it. What about yourself, Tony?
I have 2 books. First of all, The Essential History of Celtic, which is I'm pretty sure it's unofficial Celtic. The 4 words by Bobby Lennox, and it's by Graham McCall also and George Sheridan, and it's amazing. It only goes up to about 2002, but apart from that, this was an Amazon buy. This was like £2 on Amazon delivered, and it's an absolute lifesaver when it comes to finding out the information that we need. I also have the official Celtic history book. You've got me looking through my stuff here. The Official History of Celtic Football Club, which is an official club commissioned book by Brian Wilson. That's not Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, that is the Celtic historian. But yeah, hold on a minute. Sake.
Tony, amateur hour here.
So yeah, sorry about that. Someone chapping the wrong door there. So yeah, I have an official commissioned book by Celtic, which I bought at Christmas time in the Celtic shop in East Kilbride of all places, and I think it was only £3 or a fiver. And again, it's an absolute mine of amazing information. It has everything you need, but personally, like, I do prefer the unofficial one, the one that's actually older, because it's got everything in a very, very nice and succinct way. It's dead easy to understand. But yeah, so let's start to talk about the inception, not the inception, but the close to the inception as a club, 1892.
I think we will do a podcast just on the inception, Brother Walford, and really focus on a lot of the finer details. But because this one's more about the winning the first major trophy, we'll just kind of be a bit more kind of light-hearted with this kind of stuff, not go too deep on it. Is that right? Yeah. I
think two things I want to say. First of all, there is a podcast called the Celtic History Podcast, and we're not affiliated by them, but they essentially inspired this podcast that we do. They done it decade to decade, and it was by the Lost Boys, who is Chris McGuigan, I think his name is, and I think Chris, who we had on one of the Know Your History episodes, as well as a variety of other people, basically take the history of Celtic decade by decade and have a 2-hour podcast, and they're absolutely amazing. I recommend them. It's like a good box set. You should go back and listen to it time and time again. The amount of effort they put into that, and they don't ask for money, they just ask you to donate to a charity, and that's it. But yeah, I recommend that. They can be found. Yeah. So the second thing I want to say is we may as well start talking about important people. You mentioned Brother Walford, but let's actually take it a little bit further than that. Who did you come across in your travels, Gilly, that were quite important players at this time for Celtic? Not necessarily players, actual people in the background, guys that were working in management.
Well, somebody who I'll talk about a wee bit later when I'm talking about James Kelly and Dan Doyle, a name that kept coming up when I'm reading the book, it's very important, was John Glass. Now, most Celtic fans will have heard John Glass's name, be aware of who he was. I think he was like the first chairman, but he really showed massive ambition to get Celtic from an idea, from an amateur club, to a really successful functioning business and football team.
Liam, did you come across anyone?
No, none. Just really, this book really just notes Brother Walford as being sort of the key person to take it forward. That was what really I picked up from that.
Well, guys that I came across was John Glass, Willie Maley, obviously Willie Maley, but Willie Maley was more than just a player. We should point out Celtic never really had a manager for the first few years. I think it wasn't until about 1897 that Willie Maley was appointed the manager. Before that, he had a myriad of roles. He was a player, he was a committee man, secretary, he was just an absolute behemoth for Celtic. He was the guy making things work for Celtic. And there was another guy called John McLaughlin who sort of ran the legislative side of Celtic, and actually, as you say, John Glass, this guy, I'm pretty sure he wasn't even a football guy, he was just a business guy, and the sort of right guy that you have to have in your background staff. But basically,
John McLaughlin's another one that I did come across. The book I've got actually has 2 massive pictures of both him and John Glass together. But when I was doing research, it seemed that John Glass was kind of going out and trying to get players and things like that, so that's how I kind of focused more on him.
We were kind of knocking players from other teams. We're going to talk about some of the players that we were basically just taking players off of teams that were well established long before Celtic were around. Like taking players from Hibs and Everton and stuff like that. But I just want to talk about the style of football that Celtic were cutting even then. Quite a discerning style on the pitch, and this is a quote from my Celtic history book, and it's from the Scottish Referee, which I think might have been a magazine. It says, "The Celtic style is modelled on that of Preston North End, and whilst it demands speed, strength and all the essentials which go to make up the stock and trade of the football player, the one thing needful is head. The cool, calculating, easygoing manner in which Celts wrought the ball must have been a revelation to the Dumbarton people." And that's not talking about you two Dumbarton guys, that's talking about Dumbarton back in the day. Teams like Dumbarton, teams like Queen's Park, teams like St Mirren. This is what we were up against on a weekly basis.
Yeah, so I'm hearing coming across the names Cowlairs and Thornley Bank as well. Obviously, these teams are still about at amateur level and things like that. I played a team called Cowlairs and Sunday Football a few years ago. It's an area just beside Postle.
That's in the north of the city.
Aye, and like, obviously the Celtic took players from Renton, which is just a wee kind of village beside Dumbarton. I played for Renton under 13, under 14 and things like that, and I always remember the stories of how they were the world champions and all that back in the day.
Yeah, so back then, this kind of leads us into sort of football in Scotland becoming a profession. I'm pretty sure it wasn't until in 1885 English football. 1885. Now, bear in mind, electricity was in its absolute infancy here, so games obviously had to be played during the day. So that obviously, because we were not reliant on floodlights, we know that floodlights never came into the early 60s, the late 50s. But also things like film. The first film was not actually shown or made until after what we are talking about. So there is absolutely zero footage. All we have is grainy newspaper articles and photographs and like images and like drawings and stuff like that. But Scottish football was kind of dragged into being professional after a summit.
Celtic were one in the forefront and really pushing that. I know that John Glass was really keen on that.
Yeah, that's what I came across. There was a summit in a Glasgow hotel between all the people involved in Scottish football. So like each team had a group of representatives, and up until this point, Scotland was the game was kind of less structured. It was even suggested the game was very relaxed, and like the teams would socialise during the not during the game. They socialised before the game. They would have afternoon tea after the game, which is pretty mental to think about it. So a lot of people did want Scotland to become professional, but Queen's Park, who were, as I say, a strong team and a strong voice in those days, strenuously objected to dragging Scottish football towards a more structured professional state. But Celtic committee member, the aforementioned John McLaughlin, quoted to the Queen's Park members, "You might as well attempt to stop the flow of Niagara with a kitchen chair to stem the tide of professionalism." So as I say, this guy, John McLaughlin, is extremely involved in pushing Celtic in the right direction, and without guys like him, I'm not sure we would have been as successful as fast as we were. So
yeah, I've got a wee quote or a wee paragraph to read out. It says, "One of the main reasons McLaughlin was favouring open professionalism was it would give clubs greater control over their players, and by the early 1890s Celtic were providing their players with diet sheets, laying down a strict training regime. A code of conduct ensured that, in Willie Maley's words, the player who cannot conduct himself on and off the park has no peg for his suit at Celtic Park." So that's really ahead of the game, like talking about diet sheets, keeping them fit and stuff. This is back in the day when the players were smoking and drinking heavy. So that's the ambition and just the kind of organisation that really drove Celtic from being a kind of an idea, an amateur team, to the most powerful team in Scotland.
So I don't want to tar everyone with the same brush from when we're talking about up until Jock Stein, but apparently it was Jock Stein that introduced a football to Celtic's training regime. Up until that point, they were not training with a ball. So approximately August 16th of 1890, Celtic became a professional club, playing in the inaugural Scottish League. I think the first game was against Renton. And conflicting reports as to when that was. It's not really important, so I'm not going to dwell on that. But we played Hearts, kind of one of the first official games we played as a professional club, and we won 5-0. Are you aware of what happened with the stadium at Celtic Park? We had the first stadium and then the second stadium. Are you familiar with what happened?
Slightly.
I know they built the first stadium in like 6 months.
It was it not about money? They had to move.
So I can tell you. So basically, Celtic were renting this property, I guess a stadium, from an Irish guy. I think back then a lot of people involved with Celtic were Irish, and they were renting this land from an Irish guy. And I think he saw the success that Celtic were having quite early on, and the rent was £50 per year. And after like the 2 years, he put it up to 450. So he put it up by fucking 500-800% or something stupid like that. And Willie Maley and guys like that were like, no, that's not going to happen. We're not going to do that. So they leased another plot of land which was in between where they were, which is now what we know as Celtic Park. So they leased the land off someone else, and then they got a team of volunteers to build the stadium, which we now know as Celtic Park, and then I kind of guessed the rest. I need to come up with something else to stop saying, but the rest was history. That became Celtic Stadium, and that's kind of what
I've got
go to.
Quote here from Athletic News regarding the stadium, and it says, upon building the new stadium, the new park was far and away superior in almost all respects of any football ground in Great Britain. In layout and accommodation, the new ground was such an improvement on the old stands along Janfield Cemetery, that the punning remark of a supporter likening the new conditions to a passage from the graveyard to paradise was seized upon by an alert newspaper, and the nickname Paradise clung to Parkhead till this day.
Yeah, I've heard that about Paradise before.
I mean, one of the things that I came across that I kind of want to share, it's not really relevant, but I thought it was nice. When Celtic were laying the pitch down at Celtic Park, they got a square metre of Donegal soil that had shamrocks on it, and they put that on to the ground. But I'm pretty sure that piece of grass was actually stolen by someone. Before this happened, when the ground went, there was a ceremony to put the soil into the ground, and it was a big deal because it was coming from Ireland. You know, Celtic, the connections, everything. You know the story. And there are shamrocks and all that. And then there's an anonymous poem appears in a newspaper. It says, "On alien soil like yourself, I am here. I'll take root and flourish, of that never fear. And though I'll be crossed, soaring off by the foes, you'll find me as hardy as thistle and rose. If model is needed on your own pitch, you will have it. Let your play honour me and my friend Michael Davitt." I think Michael Davitt was one of the guys who was involved.
Michael Davitt laid the turf.
Yes, but then someone blagged it. Someone blagged the soil. Somebody come in and stole a square metre of soil with shamrocks from Donegal. Another poem popped up, an anonymous poem that said, "The curse of Cromwell blast the hand that stole the sod that Michael had cut. May all his praties turn to sand, the crawling, thieving scut. That precious sight of Irish soil with verdant shamrocks overgrown was token of glorious soil more fitting than far-fretted stone. Again, I say, may heaven blight that envying soulless knave. May all his sunshine be like night, and the sod rest heavy on his grave." That's the equivalent of like Tupac Hit 'Em Up, the Celtic version.
Shots
back
fired.
in the day. Shots absolutely fired. Clips emptied. But yeah, so kind of digressing, but I thought that was quite nice. Celtic Park is, is what it is, but to have the actual Irish soil in there is quite a romantic thing, which we do like. So we'll move on to, we're basically here to talk about the Scottish Cup in 1892, and as I say, it was Celtic's first major trophy. Celtic were competing in charity cups and the Glasgow Cup. The Glasgow Cup was kind of a big deal up until about the 50s, I think. I think even the last one might have been the very, very early 80s, but no one of our
I think
age.
it's still played these days, but it's just like the under 17s or whatever it is.
Is that not what we won the other week?
Yes.
Aye.
The kids, yeah, the good guys, the good Waynes. But the first round was played on the 28th of November 1891. It was against St Mirren. Celtic 4, St Mirren 2, and the starting 11 was Michael Dolan, the goalkeeper, Jeremiah Reynolds, Dan Doyle, Willie Maley, James Kelly, Peter Dowds, Alec Brady, Neil McCallum, Johnny Madden, Sandy McMahon, and Johnny Campbell. So we're later on in the podcast, you're going to hear each of us have been designated a guy to talk about that we kind of came across that people may not know, and we're going to give you a bit of a profile on those players. But this match was played somewhere in Paisley. 4,000 people attended it. Celtic were losing this match, but they pulled it back to win. It was described as an exciting but not a brilliant game, and that was it. Goals from Madden, McMahon, Maley, and an own goal. It's quite a good start to. I think this was either our second or third ever appearance, third year in the Scottish Cup, because again, it's 1892. The next round was the 19th of December 1891. Celtic 3, Kilmarnock Athletic, not Kilmarnock. This was a non-league side. Played at Parkhead, 3-0 Celtic, an easy game. Goals from Brady. I think Brady scores 2 goals and Dowds gets 1. Now Brady, although we're not talking about him, he scores a lot of goals in this little run we're going to talk about. To go on to the quarter-final of the Scottish Cup in 1891-1892, Celtic, it was January 23rd, Celtic 4, against Cowlairs won. We spoke earlier. Cowlairs is a place in the north of Glasgow, because when Celtic were looking for a new place to put their stadium, someone suggested going to the north, but apparently there was a gentleman's agreement that Cowlairs, who were from that part of the city, you don't just go and set up a stadium up near one of your close rivals. So that was kicked into touch. But 2 goals again from Brady, 1 from Madden, 1 from McMahon. Sandy McMahon, a fine performance against another non-league side. It's kind of Celtic just dispatched them. We then go to play the Dead Rangers. Very Dead Rangers. The 6th of February 1892, Celtic 5, Rangers 3, semi-final Scottish Cup. Do you know anything about this game? Were you at this game, Gilly?
No, I couldn't make it to that one, mate. I was running late. This is one of the games that kind of stuck out. I think we were horsing it 3-0 at half time maybe, and they come back 4-0, and they came back to make a game of it. Was it 4-3 at one point?
I think it might have been 4-3 at one point.
Yeah,
but
certainly up and down, and then obviously we scored a 5th to finish them off, not for the first time.
Yes, so yes, as it went, Celtic just 4-0 at half time, full zip at half time.
And then your man that you're talking about, Brady, that scored the goals, he actually came from Renton. I think Celtic got a lot of players from Renton. Hibs at start, and he was one of the guys that came from Renton and also played for Everton. I think the Celtic Graves guys have done some stuff on all of these guys, so if anybody wants to kind of do a bit of more research on their own and listen to some podcasts, I'd definitely recommend the Celtic Graves.
Yeah, they don't have a podcast channel or a specific podcast like us. It's guys like Chris 1888 on Twitter, guys like him and other guys that go to these ceremonies that the Celtic Graves have, and they capture it and then they upload it for people like us. So if you want to see some of the Celtic Graves stuff, you just Google Celtic Graves and go to YouTube, and you can actually see some of the ceremonies. They are represented, and how do I find the word? They're represented very well by Celtic. For example, I watched one yesterday, and it had Paul Cuddihy, who's the guy that does Celtic TV. We'll talk about Celtic TV later, actually, because it was quite funny last night. And Jim Craig was at one.
Jim Craig does a lot of good things like that. I'm sure he's at most of these.
Yeah. He's a very good talker, and we're going to talk about Jim Craig later on as well, because you were at an event last night. But 2 of the lines were at the one that I looked at today, and I know from experience and reading and watching other ones, like Neil Lennon has been at one. There was one, I can't remember who it was. It might have been Danny Doyle. No, Johnny Doyle. I can't remember who it was, but the entire Celtic team from that time, like Scott Brown and all that. I think McGeoch, Lennon, all attended an event. But we're digressing a little bit. But the Celtic Graves, again, we are fans of them. We kind of support them, and if you want to know more, give them a like on Twitter or give them a follow, whatever you do on Twitter. So the Celtic Rangers game 5-3. I was reading an article, very old article from the Dundee Courier, and it describes Celtic as the Glasgow Irishmen. I just don't think that would ever fly. You just would never get that these days, obviously. But then Celtic back then were a team made up of Irish people, or first generation Irish people. 10,000 people attended this match. It was pretty big, and the team was Cullen. What was Cullen's name? Was it first name?
It was Joseph
Cullen. Joseph Cullen, Jeremiah Reynolds, Dan Doyle, Peter Dowds, Kelly, Willie Maley, Neil McCallum, Johnny Campbell, Sandy McMahon, Alec Brady, and a Cunningham. Some of the names are difficult to find depending on what is available, so I apologise for the stuttering of that. But yeah, so we continue. And as I explained, Celtic absolutely 4-0, full zip at half time, and 2 goals again from Brady. That's 3 games in a row he's scored 2 goals in each game. McCallum, Cunningham, and Sandy McMahon, who is someone who caught my attention. Doyle was supposed to be splendid in this match, so there you go. And Rangers actually had a goal chopped off in this game, so it was quite a tie. That kind of leads us up to the final, or the first final. Liam, what happens in the first final?
Well, in the first final, took place at Ibrox because it was featured Queen's Park, and obviously they use Hampden as a home stadium, so therefore it couldn't be played there. the score was 1-0, and it happened on the 12th of March 1892, and the only scorer that day was John Campbell. One thing I noticed when I was looking this up, that the referee that day was a Mr. Snedden, who was like the president of the SFA, which when they'd noted that Queen's Park, when I was looking things up, they'd noted that Queen's Park were the establishment team, and here you've got the president of the SFA refereeing the game, which I found quite interesting.
You might find that maybe be part of the course back then, because they might not have so many referees, so it might just be people who the referees would make up the kind of the SFA. And the SFA, are they based in Hampden as well back then? Because I know they are now, so that might, like, you certainly think that'd be a bit of a conflict of interest.
Most likely, but the game itself was well attended. There was 40,000 fans came, and the gates opened 4 hours before kickoff, and they had to close the gates at 3:10 due to the amount of people that came in. The game itself had to be not abandoned, but at half time the game itself was agreed to switch to a friendly due to the fact that the vast number of supporters in the stadium were continually encroaching onto the pitch. Obviously back then there was no crush barriers that you got.
G4S, there was no G4S.
The security did end up a bit heavy-handed, because it wasn't until the police and the mounted police came on that actually managed to control the fans. But reading up on it, it said that pretty much Queen's Park dominated the game, and Celtic, Celtic managed to come out second half and dominate that. And therefore,
who was it that scored?
It was John Campbell.
John Campbell scored.
Yeah. Yes.
So the interesting thing for this is that people are probably wondering why we're talking about the first final. So as you say, a lot of people were locked outside the stadium, but there was also people skipping the barriers and doing stuff like that. And I don't even think they would have had walls then. It was probably a rope to pen people in.
They says it was Ibrox had been set up a bit better than any other stadiums for administrating people in, but yes, that was just a rope. Hence why the players kept complaining about encroachment from the fans.
Correct in saying that this encroachment actually was quite common back in the days for big games, and that the captains and the referees would not kind of come to this agreement that they would turn it into a friendly. So it wasn't totally wild that it happened. It kind of happened every now and again.
Yeah. No, that's true.
That's kind of why it became, because at half time they realised, I think the two captains, and again it's more of a gentlemanly thing. The two captains made an agreement at half time with the referee where they shook on it to play the game out, and whoever wins the game, it doesn't matter, it's only a friendly, and the Celtic obviously wins the game. It was
0-0 at half time, so it was obviously a fair decision at half time. It wasn't as if Celtic were 1-0 up, or Queen's Park didn't score that day, so it wasn't as if there was a situation where a team was already winning. So it wasn't until the second half that Celtic got the goal. But obviously, the first half, Queen's Park were the dominant side.
I think it'd be interesting to know how they got that message out to the crowd. If the crowd are that boisterous and coaching the park,
going by what I found out, that the crowd didn't actually know. There was no announcement. Right. It wasn't until the game went on that the crowd sort of took note due to the way the two teams were playing the game out.
Yeah, you probably be able to tell the tackles wouldn't be so ferocious. Maybe the players wouldn't be so worried about chasing back and things like that. You definitely see a difference in the on-field play.
On this day, the team that played in the first final was Joseph Cullen, Jeremiah Reynolds, Dan Doyle, Willie Maley, James Kelly, Peter Dowds, Neil McCallum, Alex Brady, Johnny Madden, John Campbell and Sandy McMahon.
Right, yeah, so as Liam's just spoke about the first game, he's read out the team. A lot of the names there people have maybe heard of in certain songs, and when you're watching DVDs about the history and things like that. So what we'll try and do is give a bit more information on some of the players now. Obviously the first player that really sticks out to me is James Kelly, who I think most Celtic fans will be aware of the name Kelly especially. Obviously it's quite a big in Celtic's history. Jimmy Kelly, as he was also known, was Celtic's first ever team captain. He was a centre half and regarded as a star signing and one of the most significant signings in our history. There was a lot of work to entice him to choose Celtic above Hibs, with the aforementioned John Glass getting a lot of the credit. Now, as I mentioned earlier, doing the research, John Glass is a really interesting character and somebody I would like to cover in a bit more detail. So Kelly was signed from Renton, where he had great success, having just won 2 of the last 4 Scottish Cups. And as we mentioned earlier, Renton were crowned champions of the world after winning one of the Scottish Cups. They beat West Bromwich Albion, who were the English cup holders, 4-1. Kelly's signing was also viewed as a catalyst for signing other big names, as a clear statement of intent. So again, you're talking about the ambition that Celtic had when they were quite a young club, but they were going out and buying like the Renton's centre half, Renton's captain. So it's a real flagship signing. Now, there was controversy with this signing, with Celtic being accused of bending the rules. Now, in these days, as we spoke about, Scottish football was an amateur sport, and all the clubs were allowed to pay the players with just compensation they would get for missing days' work. Now, this changed in 1893, just a few years later. So, Celtic are reported to have funded Kelly's transfer with the promise of shares when John McLaughlin took the club professional. It also meant it gave him money to buy a pub. And in those days, a pub would turn over loads of money, so that was going to be another income stream for Kelly. So I'm just going to read something out from the book regarding James Kelly. It's got here. So it's James Kelly of Renton, who was the most accomplished centre half in the whole of Scotland, was wooed away from that club by the incessant efforts of John Glass, a speedy competitor who was never knew when he was beaten. The Scottish international's decision to commit himself to Celtic rather than Hibs, who were also changing his signature, showed that Celtic were of the sufficient stature to be ready to challenge the big boys. It was also the beginning of the Kelly connection with the club. Both he and his son Robert would later hold the position of Celtic chairman. Celtic's single-mindedness in acquiring the best players available was a vital ingredient in the club's vigorous battle to have themselves taken seriously. So that's really, again, we're talking about just ambition. They want to be the best and they're willing to bend the rules, as it says there. So just talking about Kelly the player, he played centre half, but he was famous for linking defence and attack. Very fast, as it's been mentioned. He was only 5'8", which isn't a great height, not exactly at all centre half, but he really led by example. He was the captain of Celtic and the captain of Scotland. I heard, I think it was Jim Craig talking about him on that podcast that someone had recorded and put out for Celtic Graves, and when he was describing him, it sounded like a bit like the kind of the pivot player, where he would get the ball and take it from the defence and create attacks. Can you think of any player these days that would kind of you would liken him to him?
So a guy who plays in front of the defence.
Well, I think he's actually centre half, but he doesn't play the pivot like Busquets. He's deeper, but he actually plays centre half. But he's really he'll take the ball forward and pass and that. I'll just, when I was describing him to my friend in work, he said he sounds a bit like Cannavaro.
I was going to say maybe more so an older Lothar Matthäus when he obviously dropped deeper.
No, I can't actually think of anyone that would, like a Sergio Ramos. He's quite a progressive.
Piqué, I suppose Ramos and Piqué.
Yeah,
I mean, it's that style of football in Spain where everyone's taught how to pass, and Ramos scores a lot of goals. I'm not really sure in how many assists he would get. I don't really know that, but yeah, I guess
think it was really one for making assists, but it was just really getting the ball from defence up to attack and letting the forwards back in those days. I think they had 5 or 6 up front, letting them do the rest of the work. Now, as I said earlier, Kelly was the first captain. He captained us in our first game against Rangers when we beat them. I believe it was 5-1. Is that right?
Yeah.
So that's quite a familiar scoreline these days. He scored the second goal also. So he retired from Celtic having made 139 League and Scottish Cup appearances, and he scored 11 goals. He won the league on 3 occasions and the Scottish Cup once. As I mentioned earlier, he went on to be elected as chairman of Celtic from 1909 to 1914, and he remained on the board until 1932. So he's with Celtic for the best part of, or just over 30 years. One quote from Willie Mailey regarding Kelly, which is quite short but really to the point, is "No Kelly, no Celtic." So that just shows you how important a role he played.
Yeah, we really are talking about the roots of Celtic here. We're talking like, you know, we haven't really went this far back before, but I find it very interesting and really, really important to do these ones. But we're talking about guys that were, like, I'm about to talk about a guy in a moment, Sandy McMahon, was regarded. I'll talk about him now. I'll actually just start by asking you a question. I know it's kind of not the dovetail that we like to do on here, but I just want to ask you, like, first, I'll ask you a question about Kelly. Was he a character on the pitch? Was he a personality? Did you come across that?
He was, what I've heard is he's just an absolute leader. He led by example. I think people talk about him, I think Liam might have got this as well, talking about him being absolutely brilliant in the cup final.
Yeah.
So I didn't really come across as being like an aggressive or dirty or really hard. It was just an absolute leader and someone that you could really depend on. A bit maybe like Paul McStay. He was really led by example. Yeah,
there is a distinction between a character or a personality type and an absolute leader and a warrior on the pitch. They're not the same. But I want to ask you, is it important to have characters and personality on the pitch, Liam?
I would say it is, because prime example is, I'd say, last year's team, the actual current last year's team, where there seemed to be a lack of character and leadership on the pitch compared to this year, where everybody's a leader on the pitch this year. It makes a difference.
I agree with that. Something I have noticed, there is everyone in this 2017, everyone this season has their own role, has their own character, has their own leader, their own style of leadership. Like Stuart Armstrong last night taking the armband when Lustig went off. But Gilly, same question to you. Do you think that this might be a rhetorical question? Is it important to have characters and personality on the pitch?
Aye, absolutely. It says a lot about a person, the kind of character. Now, even if that character, like people like James Forrest, who aren't exactly characters, I wouldn't think, because sometimes he can seem a bit bland, but I'm sure in his own way, like, there'll be characters, and they'll all get on kind of in the dressing room and things like that. But you'll have the characters like Scott Brown and Jimmy Johnson, who people sit and tell stories about all day. But it's just whatever, as long as the players are comfortable in playing, they're going to play at their best. And like you're talking about the captains this season, like a Neil's team were 11 captains in the park. Anyone could have wore that armband. For a few years, we teams where you couldn't pick a captain. This year, when Scott Brown's not playing, generally Lustig or Armstrong get the captaincy. But if you didn't know that, you could go, right, Tierney, he's a captain, absolutely no bother. Armstrong leads by example, he could be a captain. McGregor's took the armband a few times, I'm sure. So that's a great sign. The team, the armband could go to most players. That's really what you want from a football team.
To not really talk too much about last night or the current, now we'll wait to the end, but we do have a team of leaders on the pitch now, not necessarily big characters, but a team of like guys who will stand up and will be counted upon. I just want to ask you another question before I start talking about someone. What are the traditions or demands, plural, we have as fans from the team on the pitch, Liam?
I'd say to play good football, but with it, obviously a winning ethos.
Okay. It's again almost rhetorical, Gilly. Same question to you. What traditions or demands do we have from the team?
100% commitment and never say die attitude. They might not be the best player in the world, but they're going to give us 100%. That's all we can ask for. Certainly last season, watching players, you didn't think they were giving 100%, and that is the most frustrating thing you can ever see as a football fan. What is the Celtic tradition? That's an open question.
To be, as in the ethos of the club, or like as in the way as a football team.
So the traditional Celtic way, the style of football that Celtic, have been known to play, it could be said started with this guy, Sandy McMahon, also known as the Duke. He provided a presence on the pitch and commanded respect on it. Apparently he was very well read, very academic, and it suggested that this afforded him the intelligence on the pitch, because Off the pitch, he could be found like reading in libraries and stuff like that. It was said that he was one of the first superstars Celtic ever had. He was also known as the Prince of Dribblers, and he helped other people on the pitch. And even though he was still very, very young, like early 20s when we signed him, he had an older head on him. And with football, again, like at the very, very beginning of football, this infancy, someone like kind of thinking a little bit outside the box from anyone else on the pitch, a kind of out there guy, kind of not thinking in the same way as others, would be a complete asset to have on the pitch. And this is kind of what Sandy brought to the team. And I don't think that I'm overstating it when I say that he helped Celtic evolve in the same way as Maley did, in the same way as these guys like John Glass and his like Kelly, like you mentioned, Gilly. He helped Celtic evolve into the successful club that they are today, and he really kick-started the success in total. He played for Celtic from 1891 until 1903. He won 3 Scottish Cups in 1892, 99 and 1900. Bloody 1900. He scored in all 3 finals and 4 Scottish League medals in 93, 94, 96 and 98. An incredible record. And the story behind his nickname was the Duke, and he was also described as the Prince of Dribblers, as I mentioned. And the Duke nickname was derived because the French president at the time was nicknamed the Duke. And it is said that when the French president died in 1893, a paperboy sold out of stock with the cries of "McMahon died, McMahon died, what will Celtic do now?" Because the president's name was Patrice McMahon, and this little kid sort of tied the two of them together to sell papers, and then in turn the name the Duke was born. So yeah, he scored 171 goals in 217 games for Celtic, and Willie Maley described him as the best header of a ball I have ever seen. He could almost hold a high cross with his head, direct it with the greatest of ease, a terror to defences at corner kicks. And something that I've whipped kind of straight off the Celtic Wiki site from a guy called Joe Bloggs that does it, and he says, quote, "It was said about Captain James Kelly that no Kelly, no Celtic," as you said, Kelly, but surely after reading things like I've just told you there, it becomes apparent that the same could have been said of Sandy McMahon. He died only 45 years old, surrounded by his friends. I think he had cancer. Surrounded by his friends and family. Willie Maley and Johnny Campbell were there at his bedside as he was dying, and all he did while he was in his sickbed was thanking people for the life that he had. He was very, 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 very grateful. The guy is an absolute, a total hero. In 2011, the Celtic Graves guys had a ceremony for Sandy in Dalbeth Cemetery with, as I said, Paul Cuddihy, Jim Craig, Stevie Chalmers were all there. If you want to hear about that, I'm pretty sure it was released on Celtic Underground as a podcast in 2011. I'm not entirely sure it's still available, but you can see the footage on YouTube. And he got a really, really glowing, really, really fitting, amazing tribute in an obituary in a newspaper. I'm not going to read it, it's quite long, but the gist is that the guy was an all-round legend for Celtic, and he is someone that's probably worthy of an entire podcast on. There is actually a book about him that was written by David Potter. It's called Sandy McMahon. I think this guy's involved in Celtic the early years, but this guy was part of the squad that wins the second final. What happens in the second final, Liam?
In the second final, Celtic win that final 5-1. However, it doesn't come across as easy as it was. Queen's Park, again, it was against Queen's Park. It was a replay. So, again, it was at Ibrox. But this time, they had, obviously, less fans there because to prevent the encroachment happening again, not only did they up the number of police, but they also increased the entrance to 2 shillings. I don't know how much that would be in new money, but that increased the entrance to 2 shillings to reduce the number of people that would be able to afford to pay into the game.
And that was actually a double increase.
Was it double? So, alright, okay.
So that's probably quite a big, obviously, it is quite a big increase, so that's probably a major reason why people maybe haven't went to the second game in such great numbers.
Was there any differences in the starting 11 from the first final, which was in turn a friendly, and the Celtic?
Main difference was that Johnny Madden was missing, and I need to double check who replaced him. It would have been Gallagher. Gallagher came in to replace him. Right. But the game was a game of 2 halves. Queen's Queen's Park were missing their two backs, Arnott and Smelly, but they took the lead 1-0 at half time. And then in the second half, Celtic scored 5, with it being a double by McMahon, a double by John Campbell, and an OG by Sillars. And it was Waddle for Queen's Park who was able to get the initial goal. Through reading things, it was said it was a pretty ferocious game with fouls being frequent. Obviously, I think Queens were out to obviously try and stamp their authority in the game after technically losing the friendly. The other thing to note was McMahon equalised that day with an overhead kick. It's obviously been a bit impressive, but that's really all there is. But I've got a couple of newspaper quotes from.
I can hear the paper rustling in the background. Just to let everyone know, the research that we put into this can be quite extensive. So if you hear some rustling of papers, you hear some books being closed and opened, then that's just how it is.
Yes, right. So the first quote is from the Scottish referee. This is the one that you magazine that you quoted earlier, Tony.
That's correct. I've got the quote, I think. So carry on.
Whatever opinions may be held with regard to the Celtic as an organisation, nobody knows the game of football and how it should be played can fail to pay tribute to the team of the masterly manner in which they play. It is unfortunate, however, but there are circumstances which tone down the triumph considerably and make it pretty much a pragmatic victory. The Queens had but a skeleton team, disorganised by Smelly's illness and Arnott's resolve at the last minute not to play. The team fell an easy prey to the combined and confident attacks of their rivals. The team with which the Queen's Park players is but a shadow of its normal greatness, they literally gifted the Celts a trophy.
So even though Celtic were 5-1 up good and they won the first game, so 6-1 in aggregate essentially, the SFA were kind of against Celtic, not the SFA but the Scottish referee, which was a magazine. They announced that the victory was kind of
a hollow one.
It was a vacuous victory because Queen's Park had guys injured. So,
but as we know, people,
I'm kind of suggesting. Well, they don't understand the concept of football, but obviously the objective is to win. But if guys are injured, there's not really much Celtic can do. So, again, it's just
the thing that got overlooked was Madden was injured for Celtic, so you're taking away one of Celtic's most potent threats.
Yes.
So, how can that discredit Celtic's victory? We've also got.
It's just the SFA. It's kind of.
I've also got another one from the Scottish Sport, which also discounted Celtic's victory in a score of playing, which states, against the most patched up team that ever represented a club in the Scottish final, what the game would have been had the Queen's Park been properly represented. Relieves the imaginative to the picture. The news of Mr. Walter Arnott's inability to play seems to have struck the team panic-wise and upset altogether customary good judgment. Minus Mr. Arnott, the team was bound to be weak at the back, but what, in the name of everything that is wise, included the committee further to weaken the team by taking Mr. William Seller from the forward and playing him at full back. He could not, for his limited experience of back play, be expected to cover the defects of the forwards. But had he remained in his place, he, by his energy and ability, might have made it all the more difficult for the Celts to initiate attacks on one hand, or stop the left wing flights on the other. The displacement of such a useful man and such a dangerous scorer as Mr. William Seller did more, in our opinion, to lose Queens the Scottish Cup than any ability displayed by the Celtics team.
So five goals is, so one guy would have stopped 5 goals. Bearing in mind the team that Celtic had were beating teams left and right that season. We had played a friendly against Battlefield, and again Battlefield as in the area in the south side of Glasgow. We beat them 10-0. Celtic were beating teams quite frequently that season, so I don't think it was a massive shock.
We beat Notts Forest 5 days before the final, 4-1. So Notts Forest are obviously a big club now. I'm sure they were doing a big club back then. So to beat a team like that, the Celtic were no mugs. I think what we're seeing really is level 5 at work.
level 5. I'm just actually looking at the results from the league that season, the 1892. Celtic finished second in the league, second to who, Gilly?
Dumbarton.
correct. But Celtic were doing really well. The league of the season before was an 18 game situation, and it had 10 teams in the league in the season 18-90-91. But in the league the season we're talking about, it'd been increased to 12 teams. So the teams were Dumbarton, Celtic, Hearts, Leith, Athletic, Rangers, Third Lanark, both dead, Renton, Clyde, Abercorn, St Mirren, Cambuslang and Vale of Leven. Quite a lot of Dumbartonshire teams.
Yeah, it's a bit of football in the area. And Vale of Leven are a junior team now. Obviously Renton are just a kind of a youth team.
Yeah.
Dumbarton
I just want to add,
going.
Sandy McMahon scored 25 goals this season. We're talking about the guy that I just spoke about scored 25 goals. A guy called Johnny Campbell, Liam, also scored 16 goals. Do you have anything for him?
Yes, he was obviously featured down the left-hand side with McMahon, and the two of them pretty much made a formidable force down that left-hand wing. He was described as having a good footballing brain ahead of his time, used his intelligence to create openings, to find unusual spaces, to create chances from distance and from the edge of the box. And he was very different to the standard forward around that day, as most of them were deemed to be just nothing more than a battering ram. He had a pretty prolific career with Celtic. It was over two spells. The first spell was obviously in the era we're talking about, from 1890 to 1895, and then he moved to Villa. And when he moved to Villa, Willie Maley described it as through the stupid action of a very prominent committee man. So it was obviously, even back then, the board would obviously seem to be cashing in on players.
A wee backhander or something.
It seems like it, but with this, he then re-signed in 1897, and he got a £70 signing-on fee, which is obviously a ridiculous sum of money back in that time. But he was very prolific, pretty much a goal every two games. Scored 113 goals and 215 appearances over the two spells. Which you can't.
He seemed to have a real rapport with Sandy McMahon. As I say, he was actually present at the bedside of Sandy McMahon as he was dying in a Glasgow hospital somewhere. But the three of them, we haven't actually. I don't know if you mentioned it, Gilly, but the position Dan Doyle played, what was it?
He was like a left back.
Yeah, left back. So Johnny Campbell was a forward. Dan Doyle was a left back. And my guy Sandy McMahon was an inside left. And as I say, Sandy McMahon, 217 games, 177 goals.
That's frightening.
He's a guy that had not been on my radar until this research. And this is kind of why we like doing this. I don't know about you, but when you come across these little nuggets of information, you're like, fuck, that's amazing. Just want to add, the strip that Celtic were using at this point was stripes. All black shorts, all black socks, and the stripes, the green and white stripes, similar to what Real Betis have just now.
So you just mentioned Dan Doyle also playing the left. I'll go into a bit of detail about Dan Doyle. Had either of you heard of Dan Doyle before doing the research?
I'm sure I'd heard him mentioned maybe via Celtic Underground or Celtic Graves, but that's as much as I knew he came for Everton, and that was as much as I knew about it.
I've got a great Celtic DVD, like the official Celtic history. It's like in 1888 to 1980 when he won the double, and I think you've seen it, Tony, and it talks about Celtic from inception, and John Glass is mentioned and Dan Doyle's mentioned. So those are the two names that I'd really heard before doing it. So obviously looking into Dan Doyle, the guy was a bit of a character. He was Celtic's first real fan hero, a maverick, a hellraiser who enjoyed alcohol, women in equal measures, and most importantly was a very good footballer. His footballing career started in Scotland. He played for teams such as East Stirling and Falkirk before he moved to England. He actually ended up at Everton. Now, he had a great time at Everton where he was a captain when they won the league in 1890-91 season. So just a year before he comes to Celtic, he's the Everton captain. Celtic, as I mentioned earlier with John Glass, are doing everything in their power to get the best players possible. So they're going for the captain of the captain of the team that have just won the English Championship. So as we would know it with the Premiership, can you imagine that nowadays, us going and getting like John Terry or a guy like that?
It just wouldn't happen. But I just want to emphasise again that England had been playing professional football 6 years had established a professional system 6 years before Celtic, so the standard would have been invariably higher than what we were getting. So to get a guy like that coming in, and as you say, to get a guy like that, it was a bit of a coup.
Yep. So he's just won the league as a captain of Everton, and it was on, obviously, like you've mentioned, 20 professional money down there. So when Celtic approached him, he was happy to come up from Liverpool and return to Glasgow, where Celtic were an amateur club at the time. So this really just shows the lure that Celtic were, even in their infancy, that people were willing to make that move. The ambitious signings like Doyle and Kelly, that we mentioned earlier, were a real sign of the intent of Celtic. And this good intent to sign the best players was part of the big plan, because it meant lots and lots of fans went. So the more fans that went, the more revenue they had. Doyle was quick to prove why Celtic were keen to sign him. He was reportedly a superbly accurate tackler and also possessed excellent powers of distribution. Now when I see that superbly accurate tackler, I just straight away think of Kieran Tierney, who really is an old school tackler, would tackle his granny. Yeah, I just saw clips of the game last night where he hit a guy with an absolute brilliant tackle near the end of the game. It's just a slide tackle, real old school. Do you know the kind of challenge I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you've seen that for Tierney, his pinpoint, his slide tackle is absolutely
and
brilliant.
It's clean, it's very, very clean, and
yeah,
he's not, I don't think he's got that. He actually got booked last night, which something tells me it's the first booking he's had, but it's not really in his character to get booked, but he is someone who has a real ability to tackle, and he's very clean, and he'll take the ball first and then he might take the man, but he very, 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 very rarely gives fouls away. But I can see why that he has that sort of old school. A lot of defenders these days are so cynical and they'll do anything to sort of stop the flow of play, whereas he's quite a fair guy. It's very, very rare and very refreshing, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. Now, so Doyle's obviously a great tackler, but he's also well known for his accuracy in his long range passes, which were apparently equally anticipated by the forwards and supporters alike. So the supporters were actually apparently used to cheer when he would hit these like cross-field passes with his left foot. It's not something that you'd expect to get appreciated back then, but it's pretty interesting. So during his time at Celtic, he won 4 league championships, 1 Scottish Cup, and he got 8 Scotland caps. He, like James Kelly, went on to captain Scotland and Celtic. So it's pretty big. I've got a few wee quotes. This is a quote from Celtic Wiki. Doyle did not disappoint. He was strong and wonderfully two-footed player. He was arguably the best defender of his generation. His perfectly timed tackles thwarted attack after attack and would be greeted by cheers as vigorous as those that met any goal. Quick in both body and mind, his pinpoint long passes from defence were a trademark feature of his game and a vital weapon in Celtic's attacking armoury. Willie Maley described him as a sure two-footed back, splendid with his heads and mighty quicker thinking. Doyle was seen as his best on the football field, where he was tidy, when the tide was going against his side. So that's it. Really likes to get stuck in. If the chips are down, the kind of guy you want in his team.
Could you compare him to anyone that we have just now, like Kieran Tierney?
When you're talking about when your chips are down, certainly that's a fighting attribute that I would give to Scott Brown.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Now when he's talking about how he likes to get stuck in, he was actually involved in a tragic incident when he played for Grimsby, I believe. He had a tackle with somebody in a really bad park. A lot of what I was reading is that the parks were terrible back then, and it was like a really slippery park, but he thundered into a tackle and the guy actually died. I know. They weren't expecting that, were you? Let's see, Neil Lennon. So he's been hailed by current manager Neil Lennon as one of the first and most inspirational captains the club has ever had. A controversial character who thoroughly deserved his reputation as a football maverick. So I apparently had missed training on the drink, and he went on strike because I didn't think he was getting paid enough. So he's quite a strong-minded guy, but sometimes you get that with players who are fighters and who want to get stuck in, that it can be a wee bit kind of on the wild side, certainly.
Yeah, they're off with the smooth. You have to sort of cater to these kind of flawed geniuses when they're in your team. Kind of, you have to give leeway to specific players. But yeah. Can
I just go back and talk about the transfers and how it was professional in England and in Scotland were amateur, and there was what we talked about with James Kelly, getting the possible shares in the pub. There's a wee read from the book about us signing Doyle. The most blatant example of Celtic riding roughshod over the rules of the day came with the capture of Dan Doyle in 1891. I keep doing that, I'm so used to just saying 1918, it's just so alien. 1891. The left back had won a championship medal with Everton that very year and had just been made captain of the club. He was enjoying his professional status with him, earning good money, yet he was willing to give it all up after receiving an offer of a game with the supposedly amateur Celtic. This episode moved the Football League to blacklist Celtic, and the Football League's England, to blacklist Celtic for a short period, and Everton took out a High Court action on the grounds of breach of contract. So pretty serious, but it's again like the word I keep thinking about is ambition. Glass is willing to bend and break rules to get the best players at Celtic.
I found that as well with the transfers. Like the transfer of John Campbell, it was £10 was given as a donation to Brabourne.
Benber?
Yes, Benber, yes.
Yeah,
Yes. It was like, that's what it was. It wasn't even given to them, it was £10 given to a charity on their behalf. And I think Celtic took about 3 or 4 players from them.
Yeah, it's pretty sneaky.
Well, the way the game was going, I think I wouldn't say that Celtic would be the only team to be doing it at the time. So why not go for it? You know what I mean? It was all about making Celtic the best, and I don't have a problem with that. It's not a plain EBTs or anything. Big difference.
So, yeah, quite a large difference there. Again, we're talking 1892, 1891, 1893. Things at that point in all of society were very, very young. Electricity wasn't really a thing. Television, certainly not. Movies, things like that. So for these things to happen, it's just part and parcel of the game. But yeah, anything else, lads, on this subject?
I've not got much more to add on it, really.
The only thing I've got else to add on it is, not like obviously Celtic won the Scottish Cup this year. They also won the Charity Cup, and they also won the Glasgow Cup, which made them the first ever team to do that. So
the Triple Crown, was that?
Aye.
Referred to? Aye, yeah, that rings a bell. Yep, that's always the start of what we have now, eh?
Yeah. So the Scottish Cup was the first trophy, the major trophy that Celtic won. Liam has just said that we won other trophies, but they kind of pale alongside
I think it's
Scottish
the first
Cup.
national recognised trophy.
Yeah, it was. And it's kind of important to remember these things. But as I said at the start, there's kind of a romantic thing because we won our 100th trophy this year, and we're now on the cusp of something really spectacular this season. We still have one more game to go for it to be spectacular, but it's the Scottish Cup to the Scottish Cup, and I just thought it was quite a nice thing to do, to really strip it back. You know, we're trying to make sure we cover all bases here, the guys that last and all that, which kind of that's fine, but we kind of want to make sure that people are not forgotten. And as I say, this is almost a year. We've not even been doing this for a year. This is like episode 29, but we've been doing this for just shy of a year, and it's important that we just bounce around the decades. And yeah, I think that's it. But so if you've nothing else to say, I have nothing else to say, but that was the 1892 Scottish Cup final, Celtic's first major trophy.
I forget to do those little ordinary things that everyone ought to do. I'm living in a kind of daydream. I'm happy as a queen, and foolish though it may seem to me, that's everything. The mere idea of you, the longing here for you. You'll never know how slow the moments go till I'm near to you. I see your face in every flower, your eyes in stars above. It's just the thought of you, the very thought of you.
So Celtic played Aberdeen last night, and while it was quite an entertaining match, Gilly here was not actually watching the game. Gilly, do you want to tell us a little bit about where you were last night?
I didn't get to see the game. I was at a Jim Craig Lisbon Lion night in St Andrew's Parish in Bearsden. One of my friends, Tony, he messaged me during the day to say that he had a spare ticket and I fancied it. So I went to that with Tony and a few other boys. People that listen to Celtic podcasts will probably know Melly and Coach Crumbs from 20 Minute Tim. So we went to that. Unfortunately, no one was allowed to record it because it's... Jim Craig does it at different places, at Celtic Park and things like that, so they were kind of wanting to keep the kind of idea and information on away from the podcast, which is fair enough. So what Jim Craig done was he talked about Celtic from their inception and took us through decade by decade up until 1967. He spoke about the game against Inter Milan in great detail. He spoke about the game against Bucharest Prague in great detail. It was really interesting listening to him. I got a chance to speak to him at the end of the night, and I kind of said to him about breaking the rules, and I said bending the rules, and he was quite clear. He said, "Let's be honest, we're breaking the rules." So he was quite strong with that. He said that's the way it was back then. If you've ever got the chance,
about what we just spoke about in 1890.
Aye.
Okay.
Yep. James, I said to him, I'm doing a podcast tomorrow night, and all my research has shown that we can bend the rules to get Kelly and Doyle, and he said, we broke the rules, that's right, we were wanting success and we were going to try and do our best to bring it to Celtic, talking about John Glass and just the way the club were quite aggressively trying to get the best players at Celtic. If you ever get a chance to go to any of these nights, they're excellent. Jim Craig, who I feel is like kind of one of the most unloved of the Lions, but his speaking was brilliant. Really articulate, very good.
I wouldn't say he's unloved, but maybe not, because with a team full of characters and a team full of leaders, Billy McNeil, Bobby Murdoch, Bertie Auld, I can see why he's probably not they're not the first line that you think of, but he's still Jim Craig, and from watching the Celtic TV, he's quite an eloquent guy. He's clearly intelligent. He speaks very well. So I'd imagine something like that was quite cool. Did you have anything to drink, or was there any sort of food last night, Gilly?
Well, it was £10 for your ticket, which was actually, I think, Tony's dad that covered it. So that was a wee bonus. It was a bring your own bottle. So I was in Marks and Spencer's looking to buy a nice bottle of red, and I get a nice girl advised me you could get a litre for £8, so that done me, and I'm still feeling rough now. Obviously there was a few drinks before it and after it, but the red wine certainly done the trick. And they brought in fish suppers halfway through, which were absolutely brilliant. We managed to blag another one to share between us, myself and Melly, but I think he had most of it, to be honest.
Aye. Hobnobbing with our pods, what you like, my man?
Aye. Yeah, it was a good night, very enjoyable.
Sounds amazing. Unfortunately, I know that the Lions are really. We should probably mention that we had John Clark on the last podcast, and it's probably to this day the favourite podcast that I've been involved in. But the Lions are completely and utterly booked out with these sort of events, and because I don't live in Scotland, it's kind of. I'm not going to get a chance to go to any of them, but I would recommend, I guess, to anyone that has the chance to go, especially something where Jim Craig's talking Celtic's history step by step, but he actually knows. That's incredible. Plus your fish supper, Gilly, you know what I mean?
I think that was the only one that's not getting done at Parkhead. Most of them are getting done at Kerrydale Suite, because Jim Craig is or was a parishioner up there. He done it as a special kind of thing, so it was brilliant. And it's not very often you go to a church hall and they'll have the Celtic music on, I think we'll call it, with a lion on stage, a Lisbon lion, not a real lion. That'd be a bit wild.
That would be health and safety.
Aye.
I know I'd prefer anyway.
Great night, aye. So, Aberdeen, we get the score coming through, like somebody's giving that's 3-0 after 10 minutes, and you're thinking, you're at it. So about 5 people disappeared to the toilet, the phone's out, and right enough, 3-0. Obviously the word of the goal comes through, so I've only watched the highlights and the kind of the after match stuff when the celebration. So do you two want to talk about the game in a bit more detail?
So I'll start. It was one of the most frantic games of football that I've seen in a long time. For the first minute, Roberts was clean on goal, and he probably should have burst the net, but he kind of I think he should have either, I can't remember, but he should have went across the goalkeeper, I think, but he tried to just blast it. But then that was it. Like the first 10 minutes, it was just a whirlwind of goals. The thing that I really liked the most was Armstrong's celebration. He went absolutely bananas, and the whole team went bananas. Like Tierney and all that were going to it to make it 2-0, and then Griffith's goal. Amazing. I think probably the goalkeeper could have done better, but then it was more or less a carbon copy goal of the one he scored against the Zombies the other week, when we beat them 5-1. But to me,
goal.
Aye, Griffith's goal. To me, it seems like it seemed like the pitch was just it's just a very, very strange game of football. It just felt like quite erratic. It just felt like an end of the season type game, but it wasn't meaningless because we have this game against them in 2 weeks against them at Hampden, so it kind of did have some sort of meaning behind it, but it was just scatty and the pitch was wild. Like the ball was bobbing everywhere. Craig Gordon saw a lot. Craig Gordon probably saw more of the ball than
Joe
Callum
Lewis,
McGregor, for example, Scott Sinclair, guys like that. They were just like lost on the pitch. And I
How
think
did
that's
you find Callum McGregor played? Obviously with Brown missing, I presume he played slightly deeper. Would that be correct?
he did, but
he was quite quiet.
I don't know. For me, I just went Beaton again. I thought that we looked a bit more composed once Beaton came on. I thought the game kind of passed Rogic by, passed McGregor by a bit too. But it was just like Tony says. It was just 100. I thought it was like a game of basketball to me. It was like one team ran out of the park, hit a shot. The other team ran out of the park, hit a shot, and that's what it was.
That may be the case because Celtic won the league, Aberdeen are guaranteed second, so they've got a cup final coming up, so they'll take more risks and they'll go for it. So probably why it was a bit like you're describing, a bit of a kind of wild game. Yeah,
the McGregor for me was quite quiet, and I don't know if it's a coincidence, but I'll give the benefit to Beaton that when Beaton come on, things calmed down a bit. But you could sort of suggest that Aberdeen had to tire. They had to tire. The game last night reminded me of that episode of The Simpsons where Homer becomes a boxer. You know that way they just keep getting punched. He just keeps getting punched, and then before Frederick Tatum, he just stands there and takes the blows, and then he just knocks them over. That's like Celtic last night. Yeah, that was like Celtic last night. Basically, Celtic just took the wave after wave after wave after wave after wave, and then they got away with 3 points, and that's us on 100 points now as well. And I just want to say, like, I think last night was the first time that that's the first time we've actually played a game like that domestically where a team kind of battered us. Is that kind of evidence to like another sort of side to what Brendan Rodgers can do as a manager, like the tactics? Because he admitted in the post-match conference, he's like, it's really difficult to deal with long balls all the time, and he was sort of suggesting it's like another side of like what he can do. Would you agree with that?
Well, I've not really seen much of the game, so I'm not really sure. I'll let Liam run with that one.
I'll explain it again just to be clear. Like, we have that is the first time we had a backs to the wall game in Scotland all season, as far as I can remember. Even against Manchester City was not that bad. Even against, Gladbach maybe, but that's the first time. And I just wonder if is that like another side of Brendan Rodgers? He's got all these tactics. Would you think that he can defend if he wants to defend?
I would like to hope so. Yeah, certainly. But again, it's as much as he's getting the players to do to defend. Obviously, it's the players that are going to do most of the defending.
I would also add, I thought the defence at points I thought was a bit suspect, but for me that was probably due to the fact that Brown wasn't there to protect him. I kind of felt as though for Hazy's goal, Brown would have probably stopped him.
When I watched that back today, I'm looking at it. Boyata was nowhere near him, and Tierney was sent for the papers. Like, Tierney was running the opposite direction, and that Hayes dummied him. And I could just envision Scott Brown being in that position to sort of tidy and that kind of dirty work that he does, and that's where I think we would have benefited of having Beaton on earlier. It was the kind of game we needed a calm head. To be honest, Rodgers should have brought him on earlier. Obviously, hindsight is an amazing thing, and we didn't, we still won the match, but I thought that was a sort of game where Beaton should have played. I just want to ask him for the final, Tom Rogic or Callum McGregor?
Callum McGregor.
Both?
Both. Why not? Just play 12. I'm not sure. I think with you've got to go with the form right now. Maybe McGregor, but there's 2 games to go. So if Rodgers is to play brilliant and gets his just gets that kind of final ball, is shooting, get back to normal, and he gets back to the level it was earlier in the season, then he is a better player to have in your team when he's firing all cylinders than Callum McGregor is when he's firing all cylinders, unfortunately, as much as like we all kind of appreciate how good Callum McGregor is.
I think Callum's more consistent than Rogic, and Rogic wasn't actually that bad last night. Some of his touch, again, it's always about his footwork, but he did actually manage to pirouette away for a guy and set him up with a chance, and he should have scored. One of the funny things, I don't know if you saw this, Gilly, but when Lee Griffiths was getting taken off, he was sort of messed around, and he was it was like 5 minutes to go, and he was getting taken off, and Aberdeen were like really on the ascendancy for the entire second half. And the fans were on his case, and he kept stopping to take. He would stop to like tie his lace, and then like stop to take a shin guard out. Then went up a bit, and then stop a bit more. And like the referee booked him, and then he turned round, and he was like swearing, like you don't need to be lip reader to know what he was saying. And then you see Tom Rogic in the background, pure gutting himself. And then when Griffith sits down next to him, Rogic sort of gives him a hug, and he's like, "Oh, what you like?" It's pretty cool.
Right, cool. What about the celebrations at the end? I thought they were absolutely brilliant.
Celtic TV never showed them.
Rodgers obviously directed all the players to go and take their shirts off and throw them into the crowd and make sure certain fans would hold me a souvenir, so it was a good thing to see.
Rodgers has just got it, man.
I remember Chelsea doing that years ago at Blackburn under Mourinho. They were wearing like a black kit with kind of silver on it, and a sports psychologist was on Sky Sports or the radio, so saying that that's a way of bringing the players and the fans together, and it shows unity within the team, and they do it in a away game obviously because that's where like the kind of hardcore fans are, and it's far away, and the players have played a hard game and all that, so it's to show that they're all in it together, it's to show unity. So I think he's probably seen Mourinho do that kind of thing, and I thought he might have done it earlier on in the season, but obviously he's picked his moment. Maybe for now it's been the best time to do it.
Rodgers is a clever man. If you watch, did you see the Chris Sutton interview before the game, which is
I've missed
now
that.
on?
I'm going to try and catch that on video.
I thought that just like sparingly. I didn't see it proper.
Firstly, we do know that Brendan Rodgers, you can ask, he's like a politician, the way he structures his question and his responses to you, the responses to your questions. So when he gets asked, like Chris Sutton it is a troll, and he was even not trolling Brendan Rodgers, but he was kind of asking questions that you're thinking, it's kind of a bit like, I can't believe he's asking that, but he was taught, Brendan Rodgers mentioned the Holy Trinity. Did you hear that?
No.
Okay, so Rodgers was talking about his legacy at Celtic, and he's like, my legacy's not about like winning trophies and all that. My legacy's about players like Stuart Armstrong. Like me, like 10 years down the line, when I see Stuart Armstrong playing in the Premiership, and I look back and I can say, I played a role in this guy's performance, I played a role in this guy's career. He actually centred his whole philosophy around what he can do for the players, and he's very, very modest and like not wanting to take any credit, but he was basically suggesting that when it comes to what he leaves at Celtic, and what he leaves is what the players can do with their career. But the Holy Trinity, he said, was the fans, the players, and I think he said the management. He says when they three are together, he's like, we're unstoppable. It's like absolutely like legs behind my head and everything, like oofed. Amazing, man.
Terrible image I've got in my head.
I'll tweet that one out. But really, and he also spoke about players like Lee Griffiths and how he said in the post-match interview, because he goes up to the Brendan Rodgers he's a class guy, and he knows what he's doing with the press. But he goes up to the press box after it, and it's Chris Sutton, Craigan, John Hartson, and the big lanky guy that does BT Sports, I forget his name. Rodgers was up there, and he was basically saying, I don't like my strikers taking corners. He's like, I'm not a fan of that, it's not something that I do, but he says we've had a lot of trouble with corners this season, so I've put Griffiths on them, and he said 3 goals in 3 games for Griffiths. And then Griffiths' corners are fantastic, and that's when you've got players like Simunovic, as he confirmed his name was, and Boyata scoring goals, and it's just what can we say? Just want to ask, does that last night's game bear any evidence as to how the final will go, Gilly?
Nah, I don't think so. It's the individual games. Like we play these teams like 6 times a year if they're successful. Like we used to play Rangers essentially 6 times a year because we get them in cups quite a lot. And the games that go before don't really have an impact to the next games. The Scottish Cup will be a one-off game. I still think Celtic will win by a few goals, but I don't think the last night's result or performance will have much impact in the final.
Well, for me, I thought that was Aberdeen playing at their best last night, and they still lost 3-1. So I don't know if it will have a bearing on the final because every game's different. But for me, if that's Aberdeen at their best and they lose 3-1, then there's only one outcome in the final. Touch wood.
Did you see what McInnes said?
It wasn't about the result, it was about the performance, and he was happy with the performance.
No, I think someone said to me that he said if Celtic never scored those 3 goals, we would have won the match or something.
It's a Warburton-esque course.
Arbiola.
His post-match interview on BT Sport, he said it wasn't about the result, it was about the performance, and we were a better team, and we outperformed them.
Makes it like then.
Just give him the trophy now, I guess. It's just how it is. But yeah, last night was an erratic game of football. Like one of those games that you only get every so often. It's not like very, very common. And to be fair, they battered us, and the goal that they scored was a peach, but it could have been avoided. And we did miss Brown. I don't think that's a big leap to say that. And you could argue we were missing our best players last night, Dembele and Brown. But so we're going to be back next week. I'm
just on Twitter now, and I've actually just seen this Griffiths going off, taking his time. I've just retweeted it. So, as you can see, Tom Roderick laughing and all that. Yeah,
it was great. It's a great moment, and Griffiths, a funny wee guy. But so this has been episode 29 of the History Boys Abroad. You can find us at Boys Abroad on the old Twitter, and you can email us historyboys@gmail.com. Obviously, the boy has the H in it. The next podcast is going to be episode 30, and we're going to tie in with something to do with Lisbon, but kind of something different. We're going to do a podcast on the Vojvodina Novi Sad ties, which, according to some of the lines and some of the stuff that you read, was the most difficult games that they played of 1967. And hopefully we have a couple of guests, including someone from Vojvodina, to talk about that. And hopefully that's going to be out next weekend. We also have a couple of Know Your History podcasts lined up, one with St Anthony and hopefully a couple of other guys, and we're kind of looking for suggestions as to what we're going to do next. Boys, do you have anything that you want to add with regards to suggestions?
I'm quite keen at some point in the future to do it on the centenary year, but I think we've done a wee bit on that time period with
Elliot, McGarvey, guys like that. Yeah. I mean, so anyway, that's kind of talking too much. You can find us on Twitter if you want emails. As I said, this is completely free of charge on Hail Media. All you need to do is go on there, subscribe, download us as we go, and thank you very much for listening. Hail.